A very warm welcome from Lagos, Nigeria. Glad you could join us for another, hopefully thought-provoking conversation in our relentless quest for African solutions to African problems. My name is Felicity Ezewuike. Now, official trading under the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement began on the 1st of January 2021. It has been described as history's largest free trade agreement as it connects 1.3 billion people across 55 countries with a combined GDP valued at some $3.4 trillion. Now, the whole idea is the creation of a single market for goods and services facilitated by movement of persons to promote industrial development and sustainable socio-economic growth to deepen the economic integration of Africa. The agreement recognizes the need to improve the export capacity of both formal and informal service suppliers, with particular attention to MSMEs. There is no question about its potential to boost trade in the informal sector, which is often neglected. Given the remarkable size of the informal sector in Africa, it is practical to submit that the AFCFTA will face certain challenges if the stakeholders of this untapped sector are not effectively integrated into the formal economy. But in what ways can this integration happen? To speak extensively on this, I have with me Mr. Warmate Idikio, founder of the AFCFTA Roundtable. He was a member of the International Organizing Committee for African Trade and Investment Global Summit in Dubai 2021 and has served for many years as the Director General of the Chamber of Commerce, Industry, Mines and Agriculture in Yenagoa, Bayelsa State in Nigeria's southern region. Many thanks, Mr. Idikio, for joining us on the program.
Thank you, Felicity. I'm honored to be a part of this program. Thank you so much.
Thank you again. Now, explain to us, let's begin from that point, briefly, if you please, why the AFCFTA is so important to Africa.
Thank you. It is very simple. Africa, over the decades, has recorded very low trade amongst African nations. And that is one simple reason why much of Africa remains poor, because it is when nations have what is called resident capital that you can actually create wealth. So in essence, there was very little wealth creation amongst African nations. And then when you aggregate that to the entire African continent, you have more of poverty, so to say. So the whole idea about having the AFCFTA creating a Africa-wide market for trade in goods and services was essentially to ensure that, one, we have more Africans trading amongst ourselves, and then being able to circulate as much finance, monies and funding within Africa, with which we can develop other sectors within the African economy. And that's the major reason why the AFCFTA was established. And that also pinpoints clearly why the AFCFTA and the aggregation of trade in goods and services amongst Africans is very critical and very important to Africa and Africans.
Okay, one of the key things the agreement seeks to do is to remove competition among regional economies and replace it, so to speak, with cooperation. How will this work?
Well, the truth about trade is that you cannot basically take away competition, because that is the bane of trade, meaning that people must compete amongst themselves, because if you need to sell your goods and your services, you must ensure that your goods or your services have a niche. That niche is a competitive niche that businesses seek to have. So in essence, or in truth, you cannot have competition totally removed. The competitive edge of goods and services is what makes the beauty of trade in any of its formats. So the truth clearly is that there must be competition. However, the idea about the AFCFTA is to ensure cooperation amongst African nations. Why the cooperation? We must cooperate in terms of having our goods sold amongst and within ourselves. First, so that we can have wealth created within Africa. We can have resident capital that moves within Africa for the purpose of investment and infrastructural development that aids trade. So in essence, yes, there still is competition, but there is greater cooperation and harmonization amongst African nations to ensure that the needed trade takes place for the greater development of all of Africa. And that's, I think, the essence of it.
Yeah, that was what I was hoping too, because when people hear about the agreement, they just say, oh, it's going to be something that will, sink all of us together. But competition, like you've said, it's very key if we want to maintain growth in the economy, so to speak. So we're talking the informal sector today. I want to start, we've established what the agreement really is. Now, I would like that you paint a picture for us where we are currently with the informal economy in Africa.
Well, the truth about the economy in Africa is that we have a larger number, of businesses operating in the informal sector than in the formal sector. Now, you can have a clear picture. Let me just start with Nigeria. For instance, we have like 45 million SMEs, and about more than 50% of that is in the informal sector, by up to about 75%. And that goes well across Africa, where we have more than 75 to 80 million businesses, but about 80 to 85% of that is in the informal sector. And that affects also the picture about taxation, revenue generation for most African nations. Again, the picture clearly is also to say that the informal sector employs about 76% of cumulative employment in Africa. And that is in contrast with about 52% in Asia and a global average of about 44%. That is a very huge picture of people who work in the informal sector. And then again, that means that the informal sector basically is about people who do business and they are self-employed, and that ranges from up to about 53%. People who are businessmen of their own, self-employed, so to say. So it's a very critical picture. These are businesses that are outside the tax net, that are outside the net of registration, that are outside the net of formal banking activities where lending of finances for business expansion, all of that can take place. So that is a critical picture that we all see in Africa, and we think that that is so huge, and it is important that all of these businesses, and in some way, can be integrated into the formal business sector for the development of our collective economy and individual economies, and for Africa.
When you talk about tax, there's definitely, and again, for the African governments, if they have to work to improve the informal sector, that way they can make more money to do what they need to do. I mean, basically, what are the envisaged impact of the agreement on Africa's informal sector? You've talked about the capacity. Now, let's look at the impact on it. What do you see?
Well, if we're able, for instance, to transform even up to half the number of businesses in the informal sector into the formal sector, you can tell. For instance, let's imagine that you're taking away about more than 35% of the employed folks into the formal sector. You're talking about let's say about 50% of the businesses that are in the formal. Take Nigeria, for instance, we take away 20 million businesses from in the informal sector, integrate them into the formal sector, where they can access loans for business expansion, where they, and again, you know that where businesses can expand because of ingestion of more funds into their businesses, it means capacity to employ more people, and then it also provides livelihood to more persons. Again, it provides a huge opportunity for tax or internal revenue increase to governments. So in essence, we are talking about generating more than 50% of funding or finances into the formal sector for business aggregation, for infrastructural development through taxation of formal government. So the impact is huge. The idea essentially is to see that if we can aggregate more informal businesses into the formal sector, you see a situation where governments will begin to have more finances available to it towards developing infrastructure that will aid more business development or more manufacturing. Clearly, more opportunities will be opened in value chain or value addition in businesses and the manufacturing sector, which generates more funding and finances for governments. That, in a nutshell, is the kind of impact we're looking at if we can, basically transform more informal businesses into the formal sector.
I mean, that's something definitely to look forward to. I know it's early days yet, but one would want to wonder, it's been a year now since the trading commenced. Has there been any reflection, any indication that this envisaged impact, we're working towards it?
Well, yeah, you can ask that question again. You're a bit faint in the background.
Okay, I was asking, it's early days yet, but you've highlighted a lot of positivity coming for the informal sector. I'm asking if there is any reflection of these impact, any of this impact you've mentioned, or is it too early to be enthusiastic that there is something already?
Well, over the years, you will notice that most governments are taking steps to ensure that informal businesses are integrated into the formal sector. So for instance, like in Nigeria, for instance, there have been special policies towards ensuring that informal businesses can register and become register with the Corporate Affairs Commission so they can become legal entities, which in essence, creates or provides the opportunities for them to access finances through commercial and development banking operations. So in essence, yes, all over Africa, you see the need, and of course, many governments are going ahead to ensure that they can access small businesses, bring them into the fold of the formal sector by way of encouraging them in some way, by even providing incentives to ensure that that happens. Yes, the impact is being felt in most instances. For instance, in Nigeria, over the past 2 years, with the new policy in that regard, you had more than 20 million businesses that were registered, at cheap, probably at maybe a rock bottom costs, and to ensure that they are integrated. So the impact is being felt all over Africa in the minimal years, but over the next couple of years, we see that impact is going to widen because they also are going to be integrated into the trade arrangement within Africa and be involved and participate in the AFCFTA.
All right, I think this is a good place to call for a quick break. When we come back, we'll be asking Mr. Idikio, how educated are SMEs and small businesses to the importance and the gains to come from the free trade agreement and other issues when we come back. Stay with us. You're still watching One Slot on News Central, and I still have my guest with me, Mr. Warmate Idikio, and we're talking about how we can integrate the informal economy into the formal economy using the tool provided by the AFCFTA. All right, back to you, sir. According to the AU Trade and Industry Commissioner, a study is underway to see how small scale cross-border traders can be mainstreamed into the AFCFTA. I want to start by asking, in a way, to establish what we expect to see of that study. What kind of integration are we looking at?
You're breaking a bit. Can you repeat that question again? It's a bit noisy out here. It's raining, so I'm so sorry.
Okay, it's fine. There's a study underway in the AU to see how small-scale border traders can be mainstreamed into the agreement. I'm asking, what do you expect to see of that kind of study? Because there's a lot of question about how integrated the informal sector is with this agreement. Did you get it?
Yes, I got it, and I hope I got it clearly. Okay, clearly integrating informal businesses into the formal sector is very critical, especially also for the acceleration of the kind of businesses intended under the AFCFTA agreement. Now, all over Africa, like we mentioned earlier, you have a huge number of businesses that are in the informal sector. Now, let's also understand this critical factor that there could be, or it is important that integrating these small businesses or these businesses in the informal sector would require multiple strategies. Again, we understand that the context in all the nations in Africa may not be the same, and the priorities may also not be the same. However, it is important to have a very balanced approach and combining several incentives. These may not be common, it may not be uniform, but there is necessity to harmonize all of this. Clearly, under the AFCFTA, the agreement of the AFCFTA agreement is very clear on the need to harmonize structures, on the need to harmonize policies, on the need to harmonize, for instance, like the customs union, for instance, and things like that, so that trade is enhanced. So even within the national context, it is very important to have clear strategies to ensure that this happens. The one major way this can be done is to provide incentives with funding, incentives with registration, incentives with providing a clear presence for small businesses who are in the informal sector to operate in the formal sector. How can this be achieved? Now, take an ideal small business, for instance. How can they become integrated in the formal sector? A woman who is selling beans, a woman who is selling rice, in small portions within an open market. How do they become integrated into the formal sector? At the AFCFTA Roundtable, what we're trying to work at again is to ensure that we have arrangements or relationships with big businesses, and we try to create what we call capacity aggregation, where we have small businesses come together and become an aggregate, service area to provide the same kinds of service that they provided individually, and to ensure that they have some sort of formal, some sort of legal capacity, legal entity, legal registration, that gives them, make them become a legal entity that they can operate on, but of course they have individual capacities within that aggregated capacity. So like I mentioned, the strategies can be multiple. The approach can be multidimensional. But nations must begin to ensure that in all of the strategies that are available, we are able to see which ones that are applicable under our own specific contexts and circumstances to ensure that we can implement that for the benefit both for the economy in general and the specific businesses, so that we can create a huge market even within national economies integrated, where we can encourage them to be integrated into the value chain process of whichever sector that they are operating in. So ideally, we must begin to work out sectoral benefits for the aggregation of capacities of informal businesses into the formal sector. And we must begin to do this mapping as quick and as early as possible. We can give ourselves an implementation timeline of between 6 to 9 months to 12 months to 2 years. We can begin to project the kinds of benefits that we know we want to achieve through them for economic development purposes.
Okay,
I hope that answered the question.
Okay, yeah, before we go further to ask about how educated these guys are, I want to ask this aggregates group that you're talking about, how will you convince these small-scale businesses to come together? Because, I mean, there's this trust deficit when it comes to say, let's formalize it. So you'll be asking me to pay more taxes. I'm just thinking like an ordinary business person. You're asking me, I'm making 100 naira in Nigeria, and you want me to come in and then you'll be taxing me from that 100 naira. So how would you convince small-scale businesses whose primary purpose is just to make ends meet from day to day to join and create a framework for themselves?
Well, that is not a problem because even in contemporary businesses and societies, you have what is called cooperatives. The cooperatives can be single entity cooperatives or what they call multi-purpose cooperatives. The multi-purpose cooperatives basically do their own individual businesses, but they are integrated under the same umbrella cooperative. So that is the model that we look at to ensure that this also can be done. But what are we doing? We're not asking them to aggregate, their products. We're asking them simply to aggregate their capacities. If A has capacity for selling or disseminating products worth a particular value, we bring them within the same kind of market environment, whether virtually or physically. The products are sold en bloc. And then, okay, let me also give you a simple instance. For instance, in the oil and gas industry in Nigeria, you have several state governments that are producers of, crude oil. And then all of the oil is aggregated into a particular storage tank, a particular area where it is shipped, abroad for sale. And each state government knows exactly what volume of oil is produced within its territory. So it's exactly the same thing. The model is already there. So what we are doing is adapting existing models into what we can do under, simple product trade arrangements for small businesses like this. So like I'm saying, it is not a difficult process because we already have existing models. We are simply adapting them for use in this instance. So it is workable and we can achieve a huge lot, in this process.
How educated are these SMEs you've explained it to somebody that is a bit enlightened. It is easier for the person to understand, but we're talking about artisans, widows, women who barely, or men who barely went to school. How can the education of the benefits of this agreement be brought closer in a way that they will understand and be willing to participate? I think what I'm trying to ask is, where are we at with educating these people?
Well, educating these people is a process. We understand that there are several or different strata of people within the society. Some, like you said, are very well educated, and some may not be fortunate to be so educated. What we're also doing at the AFCFTA Roundtable is to ensure that we break down the content and the context of the AFCFTA agreement for the understanding in simple terms for businesses run by people who do not have the kind of education to understand the content of the agreement as it stands. So we are working to translate the content in different languages first, so that in dialects, people can understand their own specific dialects of the content of agreements. And then also indicate the kinds of benefits that they stand to gain by participating in the AFCFTA in trade and the provision of services within the context of the AFCFTA agreement. Every single business operates within a geographical area. And so even at that, we ensure that capacity aggregation, like we have talked about, can work simply through geographical locations, and then aggregate the context of several geographical locations when it comes to intra-African trade or international trade, trading between one nation and another nation. So that is being worked out. It may not be immediate, but by far, we've had as much as 10 to 15% improvement in the knowledge capacity of small businesses, especially those who are operating in the informal sector, to understand that yes, this is something that is workable for them, because we are breaking it down for their understanding in simple, very simple formats.
I'm actually looking at what's the scope of the AFCFTA roundtable that you work with? Because I'm looking at an Africa-wide situation. How adaptive is this proposal that you are working on, and which parties are being a part of it? Because one thing is to come up with these ways to integrate people and ensure that we move forward with this agreement. Another thing is to get their consent and have them fully engaged to make sure that this comes to fruition. So is it continent-wide, or is there a specific area that the roundtable covers?
The roundtable is continent-wide, the Africa continent-wide. We're working with small businesses. What we have done is that we are working especially within the economic communities within Africa. We are working within the economic community of West African states. We are working within the North African sector, which is the Maghreb. We are working within the East African business community. We are working within the South African development community. We are working continent-wide. But we are working simply with businesses first, because it is critical that the businesses buy in to what the AFCFTA, the context of it and the content of it. Now, the idea essentially also is this. If we want to boost intra-African trade, and we have a huge number of businesses that are basically in the informal sector, how do we integrate them to be able to boost trade within a particular nation? Now, don't forget that these small businesses can form a huge part of the value chain. They can form a huge part of, the value creation for businesses within a particular nation. Now, we start with the nations within a particular business community, and then we expand. So, for instance, in the West African community, we are working across Nigeria, through to Benin Republic, through to Togo, through to Ivory Coast, through to Ghana, and all the way around through to Liberia. In the South African area, we're working through South Africa to the neighboring countries around it. That's the way the entire context is. We know it's not going to be an easy thing to do, because one, in the informal area of business, there is so much skepticism when it comes to policies of government. So we are working with people who, for instance, are skeptics, and they are apathetic towards government policies. The whole idea behind all of this is that most people think that governments don't have the small businesses or the informal sector in mind when policies are formulated. They think that big businesses only are, integrated into policy formulation by seeking their ideas, seeking their opinion, seeking their input. Nobody has ever sought in official circles or in official terms the input of small businesses or of informal businesses when policies and business frameworks are being evolved. So this is the kind of challenge that we're working with. But of course, like I said, we're having a huge number of small businesses aggregated that are beginning to understand that, one, it is not just for the purpose of government, it is also for their own individual benefits and, aggregated for the entire benefit of Africans. Because when they grow, when they develop, when they become financially capable, it gives them the opportunity to employ more people. So they know that they are also adding, they're also helping, to pull people out of the unemployment trap. So they understand that. They understand that they are also becoming very important in the critical, circle of creating wealth within Africa. And so that is a huge sell for us, and they're beginning to understand that. And it's going to work, we envisage that in the next couple of months down the road, we can have a huge impact both on them and on formal governments, and we'll have a report of impact across Africa.
All right. Let's see if we can take on another aspect of this conversation. The agreement is set to present a good opportunity for governments in African countries to regulate informal sector across border, especially cross-border trade, for the purpose of generating revenue from the sector. According to Afri-Exim Bank, Africa Trade Report 2020, I'm trying to see if I can quote it now, informal cross-border trade in Eastern Africa is projected to be worth as much as 80% of the value of formal trade. Yet, the attention being paid to the informal economy, you've all highlighted as much by government, has been patchy at best. How will this opportunity, trying to ask how the government can gain to regulate the informal sector?
Well, regulating the informal sector is not as easy as it seems, because again, government realizes also that the informal sector still contributes to the GDP of the economy. It provides employment to a large swath of people all over the continent of Africa, and in essence also adds, to the development of national economies. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the strategies to ensuring that small businesses can become integrated into the formal sector are multi, meaning there are several. So each nation must of necessity ensure that they can access any or more of these strategies to ensure that they are integrated beyond criminalizing informality, beyond chasing them for not being able to, for tax evasion. That is the essential of what governments do for now. And so governments must needs go beyond these criminalization methods, and ensure that they incentivize more than criminalize. That will yield more result, both for the development of the economy and ensuring that we have more trade opportunities within Africa and, economic growth and development.
How optimistic are you that governments across Africa will embrace this opportunity to, become a bit more innovative in the way they are trying to bring the informal sector into the formal sector?
Well, I'm optimistic because all over Africa, and we know that governments have done all of these things in the past couple of years, running into decades, and they've not had any they've not had much results in that regard. So having to integrate and having to incentivize is a much better opportunity, like we have come to understand. And I think that part of what we'll also do is ensure that we can engage with governments going forward to present the benefits of incentivization rather than criminalization. And we are very, very optimistic that going down that road, in the next couple of months, going down about a year and forward, would provide more results for us than ever before.
Yeah, the agreement also provides for opportunities for women who happen to be 70% of the informal trade in Africa. What are some of these opportunities for women? I'm a woman, so I'll always bring it up.
Well, women participation in trade is a very critical thing. People will tell you, and I also believe in that when you give a woman an opportunity, you give a nation an opportunity, you give a family an opportunity. So opportunities for women is much more impactful, So in all of this, I do not, on the terms of the agreement or the content and the context of it, there is no discrimination in participation. However, knowing that women face some sort of challenges in participating in business, it is imperative for governments going beyond what obtains to ensure that they incentivize women participation in business. That is going on in most African nations as we speak. And over the past couple of months or 1 year alone, we can say that you have more than 5 or 10% growth in women participation in business across Africa over the past year alone.
I want you to speak on the fears about dumping of imported goods by bigger larger African economies. There's this concern that this agreement will make some parts of the continent a dumping ground. Is this concern valid? And if yes, how can we address it?
Well, the agreement itself has provisions against dumping. But then let's ask ourselves exactly what dumping really is. Dumping refers to when, for instance, a producer of a particular product in, let's say, Ghana sells per unit of that product at maybe 10 Ghanaian cedis and attempts to sell that same product at less than the value of 10 Ghanaian cedis in Nigeria, then it becomes dumping. The whole idea is to ensure that there is very healthy competition, but not dumping. In essence, what happens in this kind of sector is that nations subsidize certain sectors. And when such subsidies kick in and are in operation, you discover that cost of production, because of subsidies, become by far lower. And it helps them export at cheaper rates and then be able to sell in the destination country at cheaper rates. But there is a provision within the AFCFTA agreement against dumping. And all of these arrangements are being finalized and put in place to ensure that nations essentially don't dump their goods, but they are sold at absolutely competitive prices, even within the nations that they produce them, more so within the nations that they export into.
All right, let's go on another break. When we come back, we'll be looking at how we can actually utilize this framework to stimulate Africa's informal economy, among other issues, as we wrap up. Stay with us. Glad to know you're still with us. The conversation continues. Mr. Idikio, How do we begin to utilize the framework provided by the AFCFTA to stimulate Africa's informal economy? You've spoken a bit about that, but I would like you to expand on it.
Okay, thank you very much. The framework is already being implemented in several phases. For instance, there is the protocol on goods that has been negotiated already. There is also the protocol on services. And then thirdly, there's been the launch of the Pan-African Payment and Settlement Systems that is ongoing. All of that is to ensure that the AFCFTA becomes more beneficial to nations, and then Africa can truly be integrated, through trade. Now, going forward, I think the more critical part of it is for that framework to ensure that nations begin to build on their manufacturing capacities. Nations must understand that the AFCFTA is just a framework that helps them to provide their internal capacities, because it is ensuring, in essence, that what you produce, you can sell. So the bigger bulk of the entire African trade thing settles on the necks of national governments. Mm-hmm. National governments must seek to become more efficient. National governments must seek to ensure that their regulatory, institutional, and other capacities are, very up to date and integrated. So it's a process, like we said. It's a process, and that process is ongoing. And we think that in the next 1 year going forward, more nations will begin to be able to seamlessly integrate their economies into the larger African economy by ensuring that businesses within their nations are able to find destinations for their goods and services outside of their individual countries within the African continent, and by extension globally.
I mean, we can't have a conversation about the economy without talking about how the COVID-19 pandemic negatively affected the world's economy, including Africa. How has it impacted efforts at stimulating the informal economy, and in what ways can we begin to regroup?
Well, the COVID-19, the impact of the COVID-19 is very, very visible, not only in Africa, but globally. Now, the essence of working around the challenges that we discovered, as from the COVID-19, is to begin to work internally among nations and in Africa. We must begin to build our own supply chains, because COVID-19 basically disrupted supply chains, and that is very critical. Supply chains are the mechanisms for the movement of goods and services from point A to point B. Take, for instance, Africa essentially depends on, or by up to 80 or more percent, depends, on imports. And so when the import supply chain is disrupted, Africa was left high and dry. And so we must begin to build these internal capacities. We must begin to build our own supply chains for specific sectors. We must begin to develop our port infrastructure. We must begin to develop our own airport infrastructure. We must create more air routes within Africa, so that I don't need to get to another African nation to connect another African nation. These are the things that have been the challenges, and it has been a huge disruption, for the smooth running of businesses, even within Africa, as we saw even globally. So I will emphasize again, Africa needs to build its own supply chain mechanism to ensure that the disruptions we experience under the COVID-19 era does not affect or impact us, the way it did under COVID-19.
What's your idea of success for informal economy using the AFCFTA framework? What's your, I mean, you are very familiar with this. What would you see and you will say some success is being achieved?
My idea of success under the AFCFTA is to see many more small and informal businesses integrated into the trade, the trade value chain within Africa. We can do that by encouraging or building more on value chains, value chains, value chains. Africa is more of a nation that depends essentially on finished goods and finished products. And that's why we are bent on imports and imports and imports. We do a lot more of exporting of crude resources and bring in finished products. In essence, we can have local businesses do a lot more of that value activity. So my idea of success is to see more value chain activities created within Africa and more small businesses integrated into this strata of business and participation.
I think that's a good spot to end it for today. Thank you very much, Mr. Warmate Idikio, for speaking with us.
Thank you very much, Felicity. It has been my pleasure.
Here's my 2 cents as we wrap things up. Governments in Africa must ensure that their people have access to information about the inherent benefits of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Also, for us to reap the full benefit, it is imperative that efforts be expended towards increasing the number of young people and adults, particularly women, with the relevant skills, including technical and vocational skills required for employment and, of course, entrepreneurship. Cooperation and collaboration among member states, my guest also emphasized that, is key for success. Let's leave it there for now. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next week.